This revision video is looking at censorship and freedom of speech. So, first of all, let's look at the definitions. What is censorship? Well, censorship is when a government or an authority decide to suppress or change printed or broadcasted media. Why would they do this? Well, something that's going to be seen as harmful, sensitive, or objectionable in some way. So, some people might not be happy with it. Freedom of speech, what's that? Well, that's basically being able to say what you want, being able to speak freely without fear of censorship or fear of punishment. And that is actually recognised as a human right. Now, attitudes and responses to these two areas. Well, Christianity, how do they feel about freedom of speech? Well, they're quite happy about it because they can freely express their beliefs to others. You know, the commandment from Jesus was to go forth, make disciples of all nations. In order to do that, they've got to spread the teaching, spread the word. And if they didn't have freedom of speech, weren't allowed to do that, then obviously that would make their job pretty hard. Now, that's not always been the case in some areas, and some good examples are when people don't have freedom of speech. For example, foreign Christian ministry workers have been banned from teaching Christianity in Iran because it's not the recognised religion. And actually some Christians face punishment for continuing to speak about Christianity, and some even face the death penalty for doing this. So some countries, freedom of speech isn't a given. What about the flip side then? So Christians are very happy to talk to people about their religion and share their views. But obviously what that then allows is other people to speak negatively about Christianity. So for example, if someone's not Christian, they can say, well, it's all a load of rubbish, there's no such thing as God. So actually Christianity can come under some attack from other people who don't agree with their beliefs. So of course Christianity, although they want to be able to spread their views, they've then got to be able to take views from other people who perhaps don't agree with them. Now it's one thing having those views and obviously sort of saying I don't agree with you, but it's another thing when you basically say that those views are absolutely rubbish and you even sort of mock them and make fun of them. And this was the case when it came to the Jerry Springer the Opera, and it's a really good example to use. This is actually a stage show, but it was recorded and shown on television. Now this show basically to Christians was deliberately offensive and therefore unacceptable, because the nature of the show and what they did, they took biblical characters and basically they turned them into the weirdos that are often seen on the Jerry Springer show, and basically was very rude about the religion and deeply offensive to a lot of people. Making fun out of religion is never right, and if you're causing offence, then it shouldn't be allowed. Now let's take another example which was actually reported by the BBC News, and this was the Danish newspaper which actually challenged comic strip writers to use Allah and Prophet Muhammad in their comics. So basically, make fun out of them and draw the images, which of course cause great offence to Muslims because they don't believe you should draw pictures of Allah and the Prophet Muhammad. Now, BBC chose not to show any of the cartoons when they reported on this story. Now, to some Christians, well, that was creating double standards, because they showed Jerry Springer the Opera on BBC television, which to them was highly offensive and caused a lot of unhappiness to Christians. Yet when they reported on the story of the comics and the cartoons of Allah and Muhammad, they chose not to show them. So how can you basically say that's offensive to one religion to do that, and then to another religion that's something that's offensive you're saying, well, it's fine, it's freedom of speech. People want to see it, they should be able to see it. So this is a good example to use to show that censorship and freedom of speech isn't always clear cut, and some people do push the boundaries of what is right and wrong and acceptable or not acceptable.